I'm the Executive Director of Town Hall Seattle, and I want to, no applause necessary, believe me. Wait till you hear what I have to say. You won't be applauding then. Okay, maybe you will. I want to thank you all for spending your Friday night with us here in celebration of two long-awaited events. First, the public announcement of ArtsFund's first ever social impact of the arts study in King County. And as of yesterday at about 11 a.m., a building-wide certificate of occupancy that allows Town Hall to finally come back home. I can't tell you how happy it makes me and how fitting and right that tonight's program is among the first things to happen in our just renovated building. Here's the last 3 weeks, plus weeks or so. The Kenyan writer and memoirist Ngugi wa Thiong'o, the Chicana activist, poet, and playwright Shiri Moraga, a Global Rhythms concert featuring Nigerian dance band Makumba with local African trip-hop adventurers Chimurenga Renaissance opening, Liz Carlisle and Bob Quinn on efforts to revive the production of ancient grains, and a panel discussion of ArtsFund's social impact study of the arts. Yep, sounds like Town Hall's finally home to me. It does. I don't know how much you know, but this was supposed to have happened 7 months and $7 million ago. As it stands, to date, we've raised just over $31 million toward a goal of $35.5 million. We've still got a little ways to go, but the goal is in sight with a little help from some key friends. Anyway, I want you to know two things: that the building is open, but it's so not done yet. We're in soft launch mode until September. Actually, furniture's still coming in, art's still getting hung, liquor licenses are still getting liquored up, I don't know. At any rate, we'll spend the next few months installing new stuff and figuring out new systems to run the place. We're about to start soliciting feedback online and at events, so don't be shy with your questions and your feedback for us. Second, I want to express our gratitude to ArtsFund for its patience with us. First, you waited, not once, not twice, I'm pretty sure 3, and maybe it was 4 times, as we kept rescheduling tonight with each new revelation from our construction team. And second, and more important, I won't rhapsodize again because I think I covered it upstairs in earlier remarks, but we're also grateful to ArtsFund for helping us become a better organization, like so many others, through its leadership trainings, through direct financial support, through being such a potent champion and making the case for the arts and culture in this community. Town Hall is a strange, only in Seattle hybrid of a presenting organization and a piece of civic and cultural infrastructure. It is no exaggeration to say that we wouldn't be here after 20 years together in a beautiful new home without ArtsFund's ability to see what we are, to nurture it, and to help explain it to the philanthropic community beyond. So thank you all for coming to our new home. After the massive community investment of the last 5 years, we hope it will come to feel like, or it has come to feel like, it belongs to the whole community. And it will be the work of this organization in the next phase of our life to ensure that more and more people feel ever more welcomed here. And with that, please welcome ArtsFund board member Sung Yang.
Thanks, Weir. Not too shabby, this building. You know, we really need to thank Weir for successfully spearheading one of the most important historical renovations underway in Seattle. Thank you, Weir, for all your work. Well, good evening. On behalf of ArtsFund and its board, we welcome you and thank you for joining us tonight. Especially to be here on a Friday night, you are officially the hardest of the hardcore. I'm Sung Yang. I am the incoming board chair. I'm also joined by Tony Myles, our current board chair, and our interim CEO, Sandy McDade, and others here from the ArtsFund staff. And for nearly 5 decades, ArtsFund's mission has been to strengthen community through the arts. We provide grants and organizational support to the nonprofit arts sector, but beyond the financial support, ArtsFund also undertakes important research to tell the story of how arts produces beneficial impacts that reach far beyond the cultural sector. For example, we've shown through our economic impact studies how the arts supports tens of thousands of jobs, attracts tourists, and generates over $2 billion in annual business right here in our region. But compelling as these numbers are, they only tell a part of the story. We knew arts have a much greater impact, a social impact, so we set forth on a new research project. And I'm proud to say it is the first of its kind in the nation. The social impact study frames a deeper understanding of the public value of arts and how we can harness its power to promote greater equity and access, health and wellness, and community empowerment. And I think you will be surprised and inspired by its findings, and it reveals a new path, a new opportunity to use art and arts programs to create lasting social change. Now, I want to thank the sponsors who studied the social impact study: the Boeing Company, the Seattle Foundation for Culture, Glenn H. Kawasaki Foundation, King County, the Seattle Office of Arts and Culture, Swedish Peter and Susan Davis, Peter Horvitz, the Neshom Family Foundation, Carlo and Leili Scandiuzzi, Starbucks Coffee Company, the Tagney Jones Family Fund, and an anonymous donor. And thanks to our Social Impact Study Community Conversation sponsors for their support of the study's rollout and conversations like tonight's event. And so from them, we thank for Culture, the Boeing Company, King County, Sound, again, the Seattle Office of Arts and Culture, and also thanks to tonight's media sponsor, KUOW and King 5. And thanks also to King 5 providing live stream of tonight's program. And finally, thanks to our co-presenting partners and hosts, Town Hall Seattle. With that, I would like to introduce our next two speakers. First, I'd like to introduce Sarah Sidman, who will follow our immediate first speaker to present an overview of the Social Impact Study report and set the stage for the panel discussion. Sarah is ArtsFund's VP for Strategic Initiatives and Communications, and really, I want to emphasize this effort could not have happened without her incredible leadership and hard work. So, Sarah, thank you very much. But before Sarah comes up, I also have the privilege of introducing our next speaker and a very special guest, my former boss for nearly 8 years, whom I had the pleasure of serving, Dow Constantine. He's not only our King County executive, making King County a role model for local governments everywhere, and making King County a welcoming place for everyone, he is also very much the executive of our arts, culture, and heritage community. And what accomplishments! He's a former KCMU, otherwise known as now KEXP DJ. He helped save numerous historic buildings all over town, including the one that we're sitting in, and he's obtained more public money to support arts programs than any elected official I know. It was Dow's early involvement and sponsorship which helped launch this whole effort. And that's why, for all of his steadfast contributions and leadership, the National Arts Group, Americans for the Arts, named Dow the elected official of the year in 2006. Yeah. So, ladies and gentlemen, give it up, Town Hall Seattle, for your King County executive, Dow Constantine.
Thank you, Sung. Thanks to all of you for being here this evening. It was 2016, but it could have been any decade, really. Good evening. Welcome to tonight's Arts Fund at Town Hall event. Boy, does it have that new carpet smell in here. It's lovely. Congratulations, Weir. Congratulations to everyone at Town Hall. Tonight we're going to be hearing a panel discussion about the theme, Arts and Action to Better Our Community. And as was advertised, Sarah Sidman will enlighten us on the findings of ArtsFund's first ever social impact of the arts study in King County. It's going to analyze how we can use arts to strengthen our region in areas including youth development, in education, health and wellness, and neighborhood vitality. You know, speaking of youth development, I was steeped in the arts really before I had a chance to know it. This is something I don't get a chance to talk about too often, but I grew up in an arts household. My father is a visual artist, and I say is, at the age of 91, he's still working, and we had a home that was filled with art and occasionally filled with artists and creativity and pretense and nonsense. And it was, I thought that's how everyone lived. I didn't realize that was slightly abnormal. But, you know, I inherited his eye. I did not inherit the eye-hand coordination, but I got an ear to compensate for it. So I really got into music. I was handed a little junior-sized guitar by my parents one Christmas when I was quite young, and then they got me started on the horn, on the trombone, when I entered 4th grade. And that turned out to be fortuitous. In our junior high school, our public junior high school in West Seattle, in my 9th grade year, my school days included concert band, concert orchestra, conducting as a student intern junior band, the stage band, of course, Crack of Dawn, a jazz ensemble that alternated with a sort of jazz theory class where we would sit and listen and chart out Billie Holiday pieces. And then we had after-school chamber orchestra where I didn't actually get to play. I just got to sit and listen to a bunch of 8th graders hack their way through the 5th Brandenburg Concerto. It was a remarkable education. I mean, who gets that? And it really deeply impacted the entirety of my education and my life. I used to be hauled off to the big band concerts at North Seattle Community College. Fred Radke was the director there. My dad taught with him. And they'd sit me in a room about an eighth the size of this with a band blasting at us. And my parents always say that it was my days going to rock and roll shows, which actually continue, that destroyed my hearing. But I think it was the big band shows at North Seattle Community College. You know, as time went on, I got more and more involved in music, and yes, I did go down. It was actually started by my trip to the Junction on my Schwinn Stingray, where the record clerk helped me buy my first single for I think 49 cents. "Lean on Me" by Bill Withers. That was the starting point, and it continued to evolve and evolve. I got really into rock and roll in the 1970s as a school kid, and my favorite band is still The Who, for those of you who know me. But there was this one day in high school where I was standing around chatting up a sophomore named Dinah, and she opened her locker, and there was a slick for a Dead Kennedys album, and I was, what is that? And that started the whole thing. I went and volunteered in college at the college radio station. I got to be the promotion director. I got to work in the industry in that way. I got to meet the music director, who was substantially cooler than me, but ended up being my wife, Shirley Carlson, and the mother of our daughter, Sabrina, who is also very musical. Music is an enormous influence in my life, and so I come to this love of the arts and understanding of what it can mean to an individual's development and to the coherence of a community very organically, very honestly. Since those old days, as Seattle was stumbling onto the national stage again, musically, I have had the opportunity to work to evolve our connection between public policy and the arts, starting way back with fighting against the teen dance ordinance so that kids could see music, and working now to deal with the challenges we have with this enormously successful economy displacing artists and arts venues and the opportunities to have a creative space in our booming city. When I meet people from other places, they identify us as really two things. One, the home of these sort of globally renowned companies, and two, the home of Hendrix and Quincy Jones and Heart and Nirvana and Soundgarden and everyone else. This is our identity, and we have to figure out how to hold on to it. There is so much money now to support the arts, and yet there is also so much of a challenge to create the space for arts to happen. And I'm very proud and pleased that Town Hall is really staking out a long-term place for creativity to thrive in the midst of this changing city. The arts add so much to our lives. They bring us together, they entertain us, they challenge us, They inspire us. But more than that, as the executive of this county of 2.25 million people, I see how the arts advance all the work we do. All the work we do. In health, in education, in the development of young people and the cohesion of our communities, in bringing us together and helping us reflect on who we are and who we want to be. And there is a role for everyone, from performer to technician to administrator to critic to maybe the most important roles, teacher and audience member. I want to, by the way, in passing, make note of the fact I saw Kate Becker here, our creative economy strategist at King County. Thank you, Kate, for your contributions. And I want to thank all of you for supporting the arts and everything the arts make possible here in Martin Luther King County. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Executive Constantine, for being here tonight and for all you do to advance the arts in King County. Thank you. We are in a pivotal moment in King County. The region is experiencing rapid growth, attracting new companies and a diversifying and expanding population. At the same time, we are grappling with pressing challenges around education, homelessness, healthcare and mental health, and income inequality. The benefits of our region's growth are not broadly shared, and inequities persist. These parallel realities are no doubt facing each of you as they face us all, and we will all need to work together to find new solutions and new mechanisms to solve these interconnected and complex challenges. But an important part of the solution is often overlooked: the arts. Hiding in plain sight, hiding in the spotlight, not only can arts be part of a solution, in many cases, they already are. What do I mean by arts? I realize that for each of us, that different images and ideas may come to mind. I'm using arts broadly to reference nonprofit organizations and all of their events, activities, programs, and classes. Tonight, I am so excited to share with you findings from ArtsFund's recent social impact of the arts study. Findings which illustrate how arts add public value and benefit. We'll also hear from a case study organization, Path with Art, and I am humbled to be setting the stage for a panel of inspiring local leaders, injecting their insights into this conversation in a discussion moderated by KUOW's Marcy Sidman. For some of you, this research will likely confirm what you already believe to be true. For others, this could be some new information. For all of us, tonight's conversation can offer a new framework and a fresh approach for shaping our region's future. We are in for a powerful night. Thank you so much for being a part of it. And thanks also to those of you tuning in via the King 5 live stream. Welcome. We begin with a contradiction, which I call the misperception of the arts. As part of ArtsFund's study, GMA Research conducted a King County poll. 79% of people believe arts benefit their personal well-being, and 60% cite the arts as a factor in their decision to move here. It certainly was for me. But here's a wake-up call. Only 28% think arts promote social change at a community level. Only 28% see the benefits arts offer to the broader community, to people beyond themselves. Together, I hope we can start to change that number tonight. Why do I call this a misperception? Because arts have social impact. Our study shows arts are a viable, powerful, and proven tool to affect positive social outcomes. Yet, as reinforced by the opinion poll, all too often, arts are underutilized and unacknowledged as part of a community development strategy. Defining social impact as the ability to advance community priorities, we focused on 3 key areas where arts intersect with social issues and meet community need: youth development and education, health and wellness, and neighborhood vitality. A focus on equity runs throughout these themes as we examine how arts can impact the opportunity gap. Over the past 10 years, a significant body of research that connects art to positive social outcomes has emerged. we reviewed over 150 of these national research resources, scanned 200 King County arts nonprofits, and profiled 10 regional case studies. This report was nearly 2 years in the making, and we definitely kept ourselves and our consulting partners at Burke Consulting very busy. Our social impact study is among the first in the nation and the very first in the Pacific Northwest to really take a look at art's impact across social issues, and it offers us a good deal of new information to digest. So, what does the report reveal? Let's start with youth development and education, where our findings clearly show involvement in the arts can improve academic and social outcomes for youth across socioeconomic status and across ages. Take preschool youth and how at-risk students in arts-integrated preschools better regulate emotions than students in traditional preschools. To high school youth and how students who take art in high school have higher SAT scores than those who don't. In fact, students with sustained arts access not only have higher GPAs and standardized test scores, but also lower dropout rates. Neurological research is showing us how arts strengthen the parts of the brain where executive function is developed, improving goal setting and follow through. And arts also build critical thinking skills, creativity, and the capacity for self-expression. These are 21st century skills key to developing local talent and the future of work. Data shows the positive outcomes are especially strong for youth from low-income backgrounds. At-risk students involved in the arts are 23 percentage points more likely to attend college than their peers. 23%. Knowing that low-income youth have the most to gain and yet often have the least exposure to arts programs, creating this access will help close the opportunity gap. You may have seen murals from Urban Artworks, whether on the SoDo bus corridor, inside Facebook's offices, or at the bus stops in front of the Gates Foundation. What you may not know is who created those murals. Urban Artworks provides justice-involved youth on probation, job training, and life skills as they install murals throughout the region. These are kids trying to move out of the juvenile justice system, and art is creating an off-ramp from the school to prison pipeline. And a staggering data point, 83% of Urban Artworks youth don't reoffend. Not only are they out of the pipeline, they are out in the community giving back. To our second theme, health and wellness. We find, both in and out of medical settings, arts can improve individual and community health. In primary care and in behavioral health, music and art therapy are widely recognized strategies to reduce stress and cope with trauma and symptoms of disease. In fact, nationwide, 45% of medical institutions offer some sort of arts program. That's nearly half the institutions in this country, with 80% of them stating that they do so to benefit patient recovery. Across any number of medical conditions, arts can help lower anxiety, reduce dependence on medication, and in many cases, shorten hospital stays. Aging adults and those with diseases that cause dementia show particularly favorable health results. Older adults involved in the arts have fewer visits to the doctor, require less medication, and experience less depression. In a population with lengthening life expectancies, these factors dramatically impact the quality of life. You may know Seattle Theater Group by their shows at the Paramount, Moore, and Neptune theaters. They also run a countywide program called Dance for Parkinson's. Beyond promoting the flexibility, confidence, and strength that Parkinson's patients need, the physical interaction through Dance for PD reduces social isolation, isolation which is otherwise known to accelerate the decline in Parkinson's patients. And put that in greater context, for an aging person, social isolation has the negative health impact equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Arts can be a powerful antidote, leading to longer lives, better lived. To our third thread, neighborhood vitality, which is particularly relevant in a region expanding as quickly as ours. Consider the stakes if we aren't open to perspectives and experiences different than our own. When arts are present, there is a documented increase in neighborhood livability, community identity, and social well-being. This builds community cohesion and helps bridge cultural divides. Research ties arts participation to community empowerment and pride, and to a shared sense of belonging. In fact, arts participants are more than twice as likely to volunteer in their communities. And these benefits ripple throughout the region for arts participants and non-participants alike. Cities with high concentrations of art not only have increased civic engagement and social cohesion, they track improved welfare, child welfare outcomes, along with reductions in crime and poverty. And these results are magnified in low-income neighborhoods. Here's where examples like Youngstown Cultural Arts Center come in. Serving as a community anchor point in the Delridge neighborhood of Southwest Seattle, Youngstown and its fellow building tenants invite neighborhood residents in to participate in community food justice dinners, after-school recording studios, movement and dance, and so much more. It's a cultural space that brings arts and neighborhood together. It's a place for multicultural and intergenerational neighbors to engage with one another around issues that matter. When we talk about arts impact, it's also important to understand that arts aren't working in isolation. In King County, 84% of arts nonprofits report partnership outside the sector. That's more than 4 out of 5 arts organizations working together with schools, refugee and immigrant organizations, hospitals and clinics, city departments, senior centers, environmental organizations, and so many, many more. Consider Jet City Improv, which you may know for weekly comedy shows on the Ave. Year-round, they're also working with those undergoing substance use disorder treatment at the CMAR Renaissance Youth Treatment Center. Consider Seattle Arts and Lectures, which on top of sold-out programs at Benaroya Hall and their work with over 6,000 school kids each year, partners with Seattle Children's Hospital to bring teaching artists to over 600 hospitalized children and teens each year. The results are clear. When art is integrated with another intervention and in complement to traditional approaches to social issues, it makes people more successful. So what's next, and where does each of us fit in? We are talking about new possibility here, and to an aspect of solving community challenges that isn't currently acknowledged in our region, the public benefits of arts. We are talking about how arts can be a proactive, strategic investment in community. If there is one thing I hope you'll take away tonight, it's that arts are not a charity, they are a strategy. This is just a snapshot of what we found. Please grab a brochure at the ArtsFund table out front, which has a link to our website where you can find the full report. At the core of ArtsFund's work is the belief that arts strengthen community. Our social impact study proves it, and it shows us how the arts affect positive community outcomes and lessen the opportunity gap. How we experience art is personal, but it doesn't stop there. Arts have social impact. If King County is to meet our most pressing challenges, we will need to find a way to leverage and expand upon this impact so more people and more communities can benefit. Thank you for being with us here tonight to engage in this conversation. So, in just a minute, we'll open up the stage to our phenomenal panelists. But before we talk further about arts impact, we wanted to show it to you and offer you the opportunity to see it and hear it for yourselves. We are honored to share a video from Path with Art, a local nonprofit that's using creative engagement to transform the lives of people recovering from homelessness, addiction, and trauma. You'll hear from participants and partners, and then meet Holly Jacobson, their executive director. It's a powerful example of the social impact of the arts. Let's check it out.
I came here 8 years ago in a divorce. That was a lot of trauma for me. I mean, I went from a 4-bedroom house with 2.5 baths and an acre lot to a tent.
I have been living with MS since 1987, and in my early years I could still work in art as a photographer and as a textile artist, but as my disease progressed, I had vision problems, I had sensation problems, and I could no longer do that. And so I was without art for over a decade, and I was experiencing some very severe depression.
I was needing in my life to find something to connect with, to get out of myself and my alienation, and I really need to do something. I saw a path with art, and I thought, well, I'll try that.
Well, I think you can't expect people to get better and value their own community if you don't create community for them and give them sort of a reason to keep going. It's not enough to have a bed and a safe place to stay and enough food. That's baseline, right? What people need is the ability to feel joy again and find meaning in their lives. And so I feel like Path with Art kind of provides this antidote to anhedonia. Anhedonia is the inability to feel joy or pleasure. And drugs and alcohol and mental illness can rob people of this ability to feel like they have meaning in their life or take joy in things that they do. And so providing more than just a meal and a bed is crucial because people's lives, people need to feel they matter and their lives have meaning.
People do need to feel joy and that their lives have meaning. Every single one of us. And art does that. It creates joy and it provides meaning. So I'm Holly Jacobson, and I am the lucky executive director of Path with Art. Path with Art provides programming for low to no income adults in recovery or living in homelessness and trauma by harnessing the power of creative engagement as a bridge to community and a path to stability. That's our mission. But make no mistake, Path with Art is not a social service agency using art. Sometimes people might think that simply because of our student artist base. We are an arts organization that just happens to have social impact at its heart. And I think that is true for many of the community arts organizations featured in the study, whose missions are focused on providing inclusive arts access to inspire resilience, lift voices, transform trauma, and build a stronger, more vibrant community for everybody. So yes, the arts create joy, and they create meaning and a sense of belonging. And as our world, and even here in our city, become more increasingly polarized, we need to find and foster deeper understanding and empathy. Art does that too. It connects us, not just to ourselves, but to each other. So, thank you.
All right, you thought I was awkward with the platform. Now, I mean, with the props. Now we have a stage change. We have the data on arts impact. We hear the stories, and we can see the potential. So what do? How do we each take action and harness the power of the arts to build a better future for our region? It is now my great pleasure to turn the program over to Marcy Sidman. Marcy has been reporting on arts and culture in this region for over 30 years, and we could not be more thrilled that she's joined us tonight to lead us in discussion. In just a moment, I will ask you to join me in welcoming Marcy to the stage. Thank you.
That's not on me. That's not, thank you. Okay, so alphabetically, Randy Engstrom directs City's Office of Arts and Culture. This is Randy, you all know him. Here's his face. So when Randy has done a zillion things before he was at the Office of Arts and Culture, but we saw Youngstown Cultural Center. He was the co-founder, well, the founding director, but one of the co-founders, and invests social impact and prioritization, I think, of equity in everything that the city's doing. So we're going to talk more about that. Less longevity in Seattle is James Myles, but no less impactful. He came here 2 years ago, and James took over the leadership of one of my favorite organizations in the city, ArtsCore. You may know him from television. He was in the Electric Company. He's an actor. But he also has an education background. And so before he actually came here to take over ArtsCore, he ran Urban Arts Partnership in New York City, director of education there. So a similar kind of work that you were doing there. So even though you're here for 2 years, your experience in this field is long. So thank you for being here. The next person is Seattle's Minister of Culture. Did you know we had one? This is Vivian Phillips. And where is she? There she is. Minister, please come in. Vivian is a native of Seattle, and she has also touched, I think, every corner of our cultural community during her career. She served on the Seattle Arts Commission for many years. She worked at STG. Now in her retirement, she's joined the board of For Culture as of, I think, this week officially. Yeah, something like that, because she can never stop. She serves on a lot of boards, including KUOW's, so, and I'm glad to call her both a friend and a colleague as well. And last but not least, you're the V. Jay Vogelsang, he's the President and Development Officer for the Swedish Medical Center Foundation. He's worked in many places. And interesting to know that you were a teacher before you were a money-raising person. So also at the Mayo Clinic. So thanks to all of you for being here. We've seen a lot about data, and I have to say, I've done this work for a long time, and when this report came out, Sarah, I read it and I went, well, yeah, you know, it didn't surprise me in the slightest. And I thought back to the NEA wars of the 1980s, 90s, I can't even remember. And you guys remember that slogan, art outlives politics? And listening to this, I think it's maybe art needs to infiltrate politics completely and take it over. So maybe that will be what we take away from here tonight. But before we go further, I'm curious, when we say that word social impact, there's 3 areas that this study focused on, but those are only 3 areas. So I guess Randy is the public official on this panel. When you hear that term and you think about the work that you do, specifically, what are you thinking about, and how is it being implemented at the city?
Well, I think I've had the incredible privilege of working in arts and culture and arts administration for most of my life, formally or informally, and I think it for most of my career was seen as a separate function of the public sector. Like there was an arts department, and then there was an everything else department, housing department, transportation department, police department, and I think that the opportunity that I've gotten to have and to experience over the last several years is that arts and culture is now actually a vehicle for the rest of the public sector to better imagine how it can do its work, whether that's education or health or housing or affordability.
So how specifically is that happening?
Well, I think that one example in our office, in the Office of Arts and Culture, is through the Creative Advantage. It's an arts education initiative that says that we know that young people, to be successful in a 21st century economy, need to have creativity and 21st century life skills. And that has been that was deprioritized for about a generation, starting with the double levy failure in the late 70s, and then the rise of Reaganomics and a lot of choices our country, state and city made. But we know that if we want young people to be successful, we have to prepare them with the skills necessary. And so we had a partnership with the school district in order to restore arts education back into public schools. That is not the same thing as offering grants to cultural institutions as a traditional practice, but it's a very aligned practice because many of the grantees that we have offer arts education programs in alignment with the school district.
Well, it was interesting. I was thinking about the creative advantage when Constantine was speaking, because he was talking about, well, of course he had arts education. That's not an of course. It's not a given. And still, even though the creative advantage is being rolled out, it is not yet district-wide, right?
No, it's in about 52 of the 102 schools. It's everywhere south of the Cut right now. But yeah, I mean, the education that Dow describes in public schools in the 70s is fantastic and should be what every kid in this city has. It's not, but it should be.
So that's an interesting segue into ArtsCore, because ArtsCore is not that kind of thing. And I'm wondering, James, for those who maybe aren't familiar with it, if you can talk about the mission of your organization and how it might differ from an integrated arts curriculum in a public school district.
Yeah, sure. So our ArtsCore's mission is to revolutionize arts education gotta put this right, by revolutionizing arts education by empowering youth creativity through creative youth engagement, culturally responsive activities.
Woo.
Yeah, I said it. It used to be make art anyway. That's our slogan, make art anyway. That's what I'm gonna start saying. Yeah, ArtsCore, we make art anyway. So what we do basically is we inject culturally responsive arts education into the school day, after school, creative youth development. So who knows Youth Speaks? Thank you. Youth Speaks is one of our famous and Marcy's favorite program, the residency with Mo Pop and Malcolm Moore and Ryan Lewis. We have a new program called Learning Immersive Technology, AKA LIT, and that's teaching mixed media, and it's pretty much a labor movement because we're positioning these young black and brown low-income students to careers at Microsoft, at the Googles, at the Nintendos, all around the region.
You know, Sarah referred to some of the neurological studies. There's been a slew of studies over decades about the impact on brain development, and yet there's that big abyss into which those studies seem to fall, and people in this room are here, and as Sung Yang said, they're the hardest of the hardcore, but why don't those studies resonate more widely?
That's a good question. I think because you may not see the long-term or even short-term impacts with the arts until years, decades later. When I was a teacher in New York, I taught this group of students in East New York, and one student was a self-selecting mute. She didn't speak. So I go into class and I say, hey, what's up, everyone? Let's get into a circle. And she would get into a circle, and she would never say anything. And we'd work out. We do theater, we do some fun activities. Fast forward to maybe 6 months later. I said, all right, let's reflect on this last performance. What do you think? This young girl said, it was cool. Now the class looks at her. But because we developed such a safe community, no one clowns her, no one makes fun of her, no one says, oh snap, you talking now, right? It's just like, she's community, great. So what arts does is make someone feel good about themselves. And if not feel good, at least see themselves reflected in the conversations, the dialogue, the images, the visuals that are the sounds that are happening in the classroom, in the communities, in the world.
Vivian, I'm going to skip over you just a second because, Jay, you work in the healthcare, because I know that I can cede the floor and you will take us home. But, Jay, I want to talk about health for just a second, because there was a time where there was like teaching of doctors and health professionals, and then there was some art, and there might have been like art therapists and dance therapists. I mean, I know people who were art therapists and dance therapists, but that wasn't something that was so integrated into the healthcare industry itself, into the profession. How has that changed over maybe the past decade or two?
Yeah, I think it's changed dramatically over the last maybe 20, 25 years. I don't know everybody in this room and everybody that I know eventually has issues that require some kind of medical care and treatment. And many of those end up being very traumatic. They end up coming in somebody's life when People are very extremely vulnerable. There's a lot of sadness and change in life, styles, et cetera, that accompany just about all of us, and for sure. And the power the healing power that we found in art it kind of coincides and goes along with the scientific healing power that we've discovered and developed over the last 50 or 60 years in this country, which is still evolving. But I think that without a doubt, things like music, the visual arts, performing arts, we've all been to institutions, I know I have, where these are a very important part of the healing process, the recovery process for people who are really suffering. And we see this every day. I know even here where we work, one of the challenges for all of us is to, how do we continue to integrate, the artful part of the healing process in with the scientific part of the healing process.
Well, it always seems like there's, the world and then there's art, as if it's some special thing that sits on, we're special or we're arty. I mean, you look at the New York Times, it's often, it means pretentious. It means a whole lot of things that aren't part of society. Vivian, you have spent pretty much your whole life focused on building the community, the cultural community in this city, most of that time in this city. And so why, I know that you've seen the power of it. Why is it still peripheral?
I wish I could answer that question.
Well, when you do, we'll give you the Nobel Prize.
It's something that I've always wondered. Why are we, in some ways, I think we've done it to ourselves. I think we've self-segregated in some ways. And I think we're on this road to try to reintegrate into the way in which communities work. I think about it in terms of, would we be talking about the benefits of law enforcement? Would we be talking about the benefits of Medic One or, Public Works and those kinds of things? And so I have always felt that I'm kind of, it's like the Marie Kondo of life. It's like it sparks joy. And so who doesn't want to be joyful and be productive in your joy? So it is essential. And I always quote Barbara Jordan, who was the first African-American congresswoman from Texas. In 1993, she spoke to the American Council on the Arts. And one of the things that she said is the arts are not a frill. The arts are essential. They help us understand our identity. And so we still need the arts in order for that to happen. And the way that it's been marginalized is sad in many, many ways. And so we got to work our way back to it.
Well, this brings me back to the mission of the Office of Arts and Culture. Do I just call it arts now? Is that the way I refer to it?
Whatever you want, Marcy.
I still call it the Office of Arts.
Call it what you want.
I could call it Randy's Office of Arts and Culture.
You should definitely not call it Randy's Office of Arts and Culture.
The cities, and I
Anything
know
but that.
Everything that your office is doing, your staff, the programs you fund, are with a racial and social equity lens. And I wanted you to talk specifically, not beyond creative advantage, how you see that and how that has moved the way citywide people are thinking about cultural activities, the cultural sector.
Well, I think that's tied a little bit to what Vivian was talking about in the self-segregation and the way in which that cultural activity has been rarefied sort of in this country. And I think our office was chartered in 1971 by Mayor Wes Ullman at the ripe old age of 34. During the greatest recession in the history of this city, 1971, well, the last person out of Seattle, please turn out the lights, was the billboard adjacent to Boeing Field. And people said, why are you starting an arts agency in the midst of the deepest recession in the city's history? And he said, because we have to give people hope. And I think that is still the legacy that we do our work in. And the context of that aspiration looks different in 2019 than it looked in 1971, but it challenges us to amplify and center stories that have not been in the mainstream and to imagine possibilities that have not yet existed. And I think the reason that arts and culture is at tables now that it wasn't at 5 years ago or 10 years ago is, one, because the way in which we've done business as usual as a country and as a public sector have not been terribly effective. I'm not sure how closely you follow the national government
I've heard
sort of
some things,
situation,
yes. Yeah.
but public policy is not in a terribly healthy space, and it lives in a very binary and very reductive default. And I think that what artists and creatives and storytellers and human empathy have done for societies long before now and in this current moment is help us have the courage of imagination to think about how things could actually be different. And that might look like an educational intervention or a health intervention or an economic development policy. It might look like a public safety intervention. But the way that arts can transform the experience people have in cities or in communities anywhere is unique. And I think that there's a bigger audience for that now than there was maybe 5 or 10 years ago. Some of that is because of the urgency of the moment, and some of that is because of the innovation of people in this room and elsewhere who've just been doing the work.
I have to say, for everybody who's sitting in the audience, many of you I know who have been doing the cultural work, I'm always super proud to say that I cover the cultural community in our region because I think it's amazing. And I'm so immersed in it that it always surprises me, even here, that it seems so insular. So it's heartening to hear you be so positive about who's getting the message, because it still seems often that we're preaching to the choir. And James, I was curious, because I know there's a lot of teaching artists who are now working in various, not just Seattle schools, but other school districts through ArtsCore. Is this a case-by-case broadening of the messages, like the Johnny Art Appleseed and the Jill Art Appleseeds going out? And how do those direct experiences actually change perceptions of administrators or folks who are already burdened by not having enough money to teach reading, writing, and arithmetic?
Well, I'll talk about arts and education. It allows a way for young people to engage in curriculum. And when you take it out of the schools, you see less engagement. And let's look at some statistics. Washington State is 46th out of 50 in arts funding. We're number 2 in absenteeism. So if you take the arts out of schools, what happens? Kids don't go to school. We're number 49 out of 50 in closing the achievement gap between white and black students. And this is a very rich, and I mean not rich just economically, I mean a rich cultural region, and we're suffering because of a lack of arts. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, it does in a sense. So who needs to hear that message? Is it the legislators or is it the voters?
I think both. I think both the legislators and the voters. I think they need to see that connection between what they, we were talking about this earlier. You watching Game of Thrones, right? You're seeing art. It may be 23 days of night, but you're seeing art, right? And that art is what is also happening at Seattle Theater Group, right? It's happening locally. It's happening around the world. And I don't think those connections are being made. You know, like, look at I'm gonna say this, look at Georgia and their film industry and how that film industry in Georgia has supplied 92,000 jobs, $4.6 billion in revenue to Georgia. 50% of that revenue goes towards education. Wow. Right? So that's a huge impact on the community that people are like, oh yeah, that's cool, you're filming Atlanta, the TV show, or Walking Dead, that's great. But what's it doing for the entire community? How's it enriching those mom and pop shops, right? How's it enriching the targets and employing more jobs, more drivers, more Lyft drivers, more union drivers are working based off this industry?
I know that ArtsFund has done, I don't know, Sarah, how many studies have you done of economic, I feel like I've done that story a few times. So this is a different way of getting at that same kind of argument. There's, how do you show the argument? And so there's, I don't want to say we have to be more insidious about delivering the message of the importance of the arts, but I'm wondering, Randy or Vivian or James or Jay, I don't know how often you guys sit around and talk about art in your office, but I mean, do you sit around and strategize, like how do we hit those people who are holding purse strings or making policy decisions? What's the way that we hit them in the gut?
I would say through advocacy and what ArtsFund does well, intersectional, intersector communication. I'll give you an example. I was in Germany a couple weeks ago talking about healthcare. And people were like, why are you talking about healthcare in Germany, right? And it's about drug pricing in healthcare. And why are drug prices, exorbitantly different? It costs $8 to produce a pill. We're gonna charge you $2,000 to get that pill. That's essential just to live. So I brought this idea. I was like, how about we use art as advocacy to let people know that this is happening? These young people that I was working with created a song about inequitable drug prices to Coolio's Gangster's Paradise. Now, I say youth culture, and they're a bit behind in terms of youth culture, but that's not the point. That's not the point. The fact they're like, yes, and now that video is going around the EU. Like, hey, why are we not talking about healthcare? Why are we not talking about healthcare? So I think that's the intersection.
Okay, so Jay, do you want this Coolio video to come to Swedish?
I'll send it to you.
He doesn't know
Bring it up the hill.
who's Coolio, right?
I mean, what is the conversation about art in a place like the Swedish Foundation?
It's a conversation we have often.
Really?
Believe it or not. This is something that, the institution has asked us to really focus on so that the environment that's established and created and sustained up there, has a very strong component of arts built into it, whether it be visual arts. We want to cover every wall with the appropriate artwork so that, people get a sense of calming when they're in the institution. We want to make sure that, there are opportunities for performing arts, whether it be just somebody sitting down at a piano or, bringing in a troupe, maybe to entertain during a noon hour or something like that. I mean, so we do focus on this, believe it or not. And, more than anything else, I mean, we're not out publicly advocating for this. I think that, our model really to bring change is to sit down and have conversations with people. And, if you can figure out the right people to have those conversations with, and if you understand that those conversations sometimes take a long time to complete. They don't happen overnight. Sometimes we're talking months, even years. But, at the end of those conversations, hopefully we've found common ground. And, the things that we're bringing to the institution, not surprisingly, are valuable to members of the community as well.
Vivian, just yesterday, you and I were talking about one-on-one conversations with people in a different art context. But when I was thinking about this panel and I was thinking about importance of culture in a community, I couldn't help but think about the Langston Hughes Performing Arts Institute and Langston, the entity, one of the entities that lives there, and your involvement in that. And you and I interviewed you about the importance, not just programmatically or fixing up the building, but symbolically what that organization is. And so when you think about community, first of all, what is the relevance of a cultural center? It could be that, it could be Youngstown, it could be anything, but.
Well, first, before I answer that, if you don't mind, I think part of the challenge that we need to address is that we talk about organizations, we don't talk about the artist. And it's really important, in my view, for artists to be at the center of these conversations. There should be an artist on this panel. I mean, it's... I'm sorry. It's just one of those things. It's just one of those things that I tend to have a real keen eye and ear about. We skip over the deliverers and we really go to the organizations. And I think that's a real challenge for us to overcome. So artists don't speak in terms of social impact. Artists speak in terms of doing the damn work. Okay? And so that's part of the challenge, I think. But now, answering your question about Langston Hughes and the significance of a place like that. And I have to say that all the way back in the 80s, Langston Hughes had a program under the direction of Steve Sneed called DCM, Discipline, Confidence, and Motivation. And it worked with Washington Middle School, which then became the summer musical. So 20 plus years running, a community-based organization was really keyed into the significance of connecting to the community. A place like Langston right now, Langston Hughes, the iconic building, is incredibly important because it is an iconic building. It is named for an African-American poet. It was delivered to the community by an African-American superintendent of parks at the time, Walter Huntley, and it has been the home for so many African Americans, whether they are now practicing artists or not. The challenge today is that the community has changed dramatically, and so the intention that has to go behind actually inviting in the community that once took great advantage of that place is a real challenge. There was an event, Yaj Yassi, who wrote Homecoming, and it was a Seattle Public Library partnership with Langston. And by the time there were literally 100 African Americans who could not get into the building because it was already full. And it was full with people who live in the community now who are not African Americans necessarily. So there's so many different kinds of intentions that have to go into equity and redistribution of wealth and opportunities.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because, Randy, when you're having policy discussions at the city, and Dow referred to this county and the vast wealth there are people who talk about, and every day I could document the exodus of somebody, people of color, artists in general who are really committed to what they do but cannot afford to do it in this town anymore. And so when we're at economic development conversations at the city, it is an artist sitting at the table. And how do you make sure that will happen? Because this is, I know it's something that your office thinks about, but how can we make this a place so it's not just that the art gets made, that the artists can afford to, eat and make their art?
I have like 100 different answers to that.
Okay.
Well, I mean, one is that we're fortunate that our office and our attendant work both on the education side and on the creative economy side are at the table in the future of work subcabinet for the city of Seattle. So when we're thinking about what the workforce will look like in 10 years, hashtag the robots are coming, guess what won't be replaced by robots? Creativity, storytelling, and human empathy. So we can either choose right now to be strategic about how we invest in the future of a workforce that's driven by creativity, or we can wait until it happens to us and see what happens. I'd like to think that we're gonna be strategic, and we are actually at that table. I also think that all respect to ArtsFund and Americans for the Arts and Westaff and all the economic impact studies that have come for this field, all the data that James just gave us about the film industry in Georgia. Total respect for 30 years of economic impact studies in arts and culture. Who in this room attends cultural events because you're creating jobs? Thank you, Jen. I love you. And that's real. It is jobs. It is the future of the economy in this country. But at the end of the day, what actually gets us to show up and experience culture is not that we're job creators. It's that we believe in something. And I think that's what I love about the economic impact study. For once, we're being unapologetic and acknowledging what it is about the thing that we do that actually matters. It changes people's lives. I don't have an MFA. I didn't come into this field because I was a practitioner of a particular discipline. I came into this field by working with young people and seeing young people that society had decided to give up on have a chance to find their voice through creativity, have a chance to find their voice through music, through theater, through dance, through whatever avenue existed. And I think that we are at an interesting crossroads as a city. There are a lot of people leaving this city. We, like every other metropolitan area in Seattle, are facing massive global downward pressures as a result of a lot of people moving here and the cost of living increasing. We have a choice about whether we want to stay and fight and be part of the future that this place could be, or if we want to acquiesce and let go and let it happen to us. And I would rather that arts and culture be at the front of the tip of that spear and be part of shaping what the future of that public policy conversation looks like, than wait to see what happens on the back end. And it's not, I mean, you can leave here and go to Tacoma, and guess what? It'll be in Tacoma in 5 years. You could leave San Francisco and go to Oakland 10 years ago, and guess what? It's there now.
Yeah.
It's not, you can't run from this, right? Global capitalism is a harsh mistress. And we can imagine, I'll leave it at this, right? Adrienne Marie Brown said that we're in a failure of imagination and we're losing. We can either imagine the world that we want to create and work towards that, or we can accept surrender. And I don't want to accept surrender.
So you acknowledged Jen Zile. Jen and Philip Chavira from Intiman are here, who are embarking on the wackiest but bravest experiment. They're giving away all the tickets to their next play for free. If you don't know about that, ask them. They'll tell you how to get a ticket, which is, it seems, on the one hand, wildly wonderful and wildly insane. And so I'm waiting to see what happens. I'll be following up with you guys. But when we need that radical reimagination, there are a lot of artists in town. There are a lot of arts advocates in town. There's a lot of activists in town. How can they be corralled to speak in, if not one voice, because you know that's never going to happen, at least sort of in a choir in harmony?
Well, kudos to Intiman for that brave choice, because I think we have an incredible depth of cultural talent in this town. I mean, multi-generational, world-renowned cultural talent in this town. And we also have 3 of the 25 richest people on the planet, the largest foundation in the history of the world, several of the richest companies on earth. We have the resources and we have the talent. What's missing is that connective tissue.
Right.
I don't pretend to know the answer to what that is. Part of it's education. Part of it is just being nicer to each other. But part of it is opening the door. Intiman is saying, this is your spot. When Ware was talking upstairs about the vision for this new imagined town hall, this is the space where the stage and the crowd are leveled and we're all in a conversation together. I think the more we can do that, the more we can expose each other to the talent that we have and the resources that we have. It's all here. And increasingly over time, the external help is coming less and less, right? How confident are we that DC is gonna help us out when times get hard? I'm not so confident in that. But I'm pretty confident in the people in this room, and I've worked for 5 mayors over 7 years in this town, and I'm pretty confident in the people that live in this city. And I think that we have the capacity to figure it out if we want to.
So the parade's outside, and we've got cheerleaders. Now, it's actually time for questions. That's a microphone. We have 10-ish minutes if you guys want to ask questions. And if not, we will start the parade, because it is about somebody sort of assembling and putting forth a message.
I think too, I'm just reminded of a couple of things recently that really, I think, took the arts into the community in a really interesting way. One was Spectrum Dance Theater season, where it was just connected to really interesting issues in the community. And then the experience that I had being in the audience at 4 Women. And it's my stories are being told, and so it's that feeling that you get that you matter. And I think the more that spreads across the community, the greater the impact will be felt by individuals.
So just to go back to giving away free tickets, I mean, as you all know, it costs money to produce that art, and sometimes it's prohibitively expensive to see that art. Even if you can get to venues like the Seattle Repertory Theater on the Seattle Center campus, which is
so many things to make sure that people can. So that's a good thing.
She's the positive one. But I mean, it's cost, so.
It's not 9 o'clock.
And then do you shut down, or is that when the martini trays come out?
It all changes at 9. Life sucks.
So, we do have a question. Oh, good.
Yeah. I have a question and a couple of observations. So I am a Northwest native, but many, many years ago I moved to New York and have made my artistic life in New York. And in contemplating coming back, and there are many factors in coming back, part of it is affordable housing. And the reality for me now, having lived my life in rent-subsidized housing in New York that most of my artistic friends live in, it will cost me more for far less space to actually come back here to Seattle. And than it is to stay in my just perfectly reasonable, affordable house in New York. And that's just a fact. And it's changing rapidly. And I wonder what your strategies are for supporting the policies that are being discussed now in your community about that very real, and you alluded to it, but it's a conversation happening now. And I'd like to hear your thoughts on that in more detail.
I'm going to set it up for you.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that I think is the value of the existing arts and cultural districts in Seattle, there are 4 of them: Central, Capitol Hill, Uptown, and Columbia Hillman City. Every single one of those arts and cultural districts has at the forefront of the work that they're doing affordability, space affordability for artists. And that's livable wage affordability and also affordable space, as well as equity. So they're really focused on how can they infiltrate policy in a way that makes sense for artists. And Randy, ba-da-bum.
Oh, God. A new person moves to Seattle about every 9 minutes for the last 5 years. It takes about 4 years to build an 80-unit affordable housing development, and there are 7 affordable housing developers who do that work. All of them are working as hard and as fast as they can. The math doesn't work. There are more people moving here than there is room for people to live here, and the people that lose are the people that have the least money and the least financial stability. That's low-income folks, communities of color, immigrant and refugee communities. It's a math problem. Also, it's not unique to Seattle. It's every coastal city and most of the Midwest cities. There are solutions, like if you built a triplex on every block in Seattle of a residential neighborhood, you can house 35,000 more people in less than 2 years. That would infer that every block in Seattle would be okay with a triplex, and we know how we feel about our housing, right? Like, that's our housing. That's not for everybody else. So it's a complicated thing. People are coming. We have no way to stop them. We want people to live here, but not too many people. We are bounded by very real geographic constraints, right? Water on 2 sides, a lot of hills. We can't just sprawl endlessly. We're not Houston. But there are cultural and economic challenges that exist. We could, and we have the choice to, take more ambitious and courageous actions to build more kinds of housing. We leave it right now in the hands of the 7 affordable housing developers who, through tax credit investments, build affordable housing. Bless their heart. They're amazing. They will never be able to build enough housing to solve the crisis that we're in at scale. So then we're leaving it to the free market.
But what about, for example, Oregon, that is now discussing a rent control system?
Our state constitution is complicated. Rent control is still illegal in the state of Washington. So that's a state issue, and it's legit, but our state constitution, which was designed to protect property owners from the railroad, now protects vulnerable people from affordable options that exist in places like Oregon and California and Illinois and New York and others.
So if you all have questions about this study in particular, I'm going to ask Sarah to come up, and if, yeah, so.
No, you ask.
Yeah, but you asked the question. She's going to answer it if you have a question about the study in particular.
Well, it's not about the study in particular. It seems like social media has has enabled so many artists to have their artwork out there, but it also seems to have lulled the voice because the artwork is not on the walls and in the restaurants and in the tunnel, which would definitely need artwork in the tunnel. What can, what can be done to help those artists go offline and have their art really benefit the community? Because it seems like we're going worldwide instead of local.
Who wants to answer that question?
I mean, yeah, you should answer that question.
I asked the question.
When I think about art benefiting the community, I think of hip hop. And, you know, growing up, you saw graffiti everywhere. And I used to graffiti in museums. So if you want to embrace, you have to make art where you live. And I think that's what, you know, if we think about gentrification, artists move to low-income neighborhoods, right? Because they have no other job. Like myself, I moved to deep, deep Brooklyn because I couldn't find, because I got kicked out of my apartment in Manhattan. So I moved to deep, deep Brooklyn. It was lovely. And because I was an artist, I was out on the street all the time because I had no job, which was great. So I met people, I hung out with people. And then because I'm hanging out with people and, you know, going into the different bodegas and making art, like, hey, let's rap on the street, let's make a piece of theater, more people came. They're like, oh, this is an artistic community. And so then rents go up. But those rents go up and people stop investing in that community, right? So there's no more art being made in that community. So if you really want to make art in that community, if you move to a community, you have to invest in that community. Number one, and that's creating visual, vocal, musical, oral, and street music. I mean, it's just, you go to certain areas, like New Orleans is still New Orleans. Certain parts of it are still New Orleans because there's such a live, and you feel the culture walking on the street. Not Bourbon Street, but the street. French.
Hi, I'd like to thank you guys all for being here and talking. I'm a UW student right now, and I'm currently a musical theater major. So I'm all about, you know, not caring about making money in my career.
We'll see.
But I'm really. I'm also interested in bringing art to at-risk youth in particular, and I'm kind of wanting to pursue a career as an artist, and both as someone who wants to bring art to people who need it. And so I was just wondering, as everyone, you know, as all of you who have experience in doing that and have the passion for doing that, what do you recommend for young people like me? Like where do you recommend I start in trying to build a program that will bring art to places that will benefit from it and need it?
I would suggest you research and see that there are already some programs out there doing that, and you might be an asset to one of those programs. One of the things that our region has is an enormous amount of arts organizations. We have more arts organizations in the King County area, I think, than any other county per capita in the country. So one of the things that I discourage people from doing is starting a new organization.
And the Creative Advantage, the program that our office runs, has an institute that's it's free and accessible to any teaching artist or arts teacher, certified teacher in Seattle Public Schools or beyond. And there's an institute, day-long, free professional development networking session. I think it's August 15th, Thursday, August 15th. That is for you. You're welcome to come, meet a ton of people that do that work. Definitely don't start your own nonprofit organization because then you're just gonna be an administrator for the rest of your life and you're not gonna do musical theater or be a teaching artist. So, pro tip.
Well, thank you. Good luck. This is time for one last question before they kick us out of here.
Oh, sure. Thank you guys so much. I would love to hear from each of you, including you, Sarah, with an organization or an artist locally that hasn't been mentioned yet today that you would like to shine a light on and that all of us should know about. While you think about that, I'll start. creative. Cultural Access Washington, if you're interested in helping, James had mentioned earlier that Washington is 46th in the country in per capita arts funding. If you're interested in helping change that, Cultural Access Washington. Thank you.
I want to shout out Yama, who's a local, not local, they're in Yakima, but they do El Sistema programming. And people often forget about arts organizations or even nonprofits outside of Seattle. So I just want to shine some light because two of their EDs are in the audience.
Artist or organization, right? Artist
Yep,
or
anything.
organization. I want to shine a light on Tarika Waters and Martyr Sauce Gallery in Pioneer Square.
I would like to shout out Ahamefele Oluo, creator of Thin Skin, the movie that's about to come out. The Monday of Memorial Day is the Thin Skin party at the Egyptian Theater on Capitol Hill as part of SIF. If you didn't see Now I'm Fine, his show it on the boards. It was remarkable and a civic treasure, and he's a genius.
I want to shout out David Rue and Randy Ford, dandy, dancers, performers, amazing. Plus, David Rue, a local treasure.
I'm going to sign my proxy to Sarah. I'm relatively new here. I've only been here a couple years in Seattle, so unfortunately I don't have a...
Jacob Lawrence, there's a lot of that work at Swedish.
Yep.
Okay, good. Jacob Lawrence.
And he's deserving of that light.
I'm going to take Jay's proxy anyway, and rather than pick one, I'm actually going to say, if you go to the ArtsFund website, we have over 120 cultural partners, and we have a link to all of their organizations' websites on our main page. Half of those organizations have what you might call a mid to small budget, and a third of them have really small budgets. So they might be organizations that aren't yet on your radar, and I suggest you go to our cultural partners page and just start exploring.
Thank you all for coming on a Friday night, the hardest of the hardcore. And thanks for panelists for doing the work that you do.
Thank you, Marcy.
Yeah. I echo the thanks, and please join me, thank you all panelists, and please join me in thanking Marcy for moderating and facilitating the discussion. I also want to thank Sung, Executive Constantine, and Holly, and everyone who lent their voice to this conversation tonight. I want to thank our sponsors for the community conversations and for the social impact study. I really want to thank all of the organizations who participated in our survey, the 10 case studies, many of whom are here tonight, and the hundreds of arts organizations and thousands of artists who are advancing this work day in and day out. I'd also like to thank my notes, which are over there, so let me think who else I want to thank. I want to thank those who helped get us ready for the conversation tonight. The town hall staff for welcoming us among the first in their new space and really for opening it up to us. I can think of no better space to have a conversation about how arts and community intersect. And the staff, in particular in the room with us tonight, really have been literally plugging the things in to make the space ready for us tonight. I also want to thank the ArtsFund staff, especially Katie Corella, for their tireless work in advancing this, and others in the community like Roberta Romero, who have prepped us and gotten us ready for this evening tonight. I want to thank ArtsFund's board leadership for investing in all of this work in our leadership programs. And I want to thank all of you, live stream and in person, for joining us tonight and investing your time in this conversation and hopefully your hearts in moving this forward as we move on. Thank you.